Back. YouTube. Make sure we're up and running. All right. Can you guys hear us? Can you hear me, I should say? I'm late to my own party. Mic check 1 2 check 1. All right. Yeah, we're live. Martin Goldberg's back. Martin, thanks for coming back on. It's been a long hiatus since the last time we spoke. We spoke the tail end of 2022. I appreciate you responding to my email. And first and foremost, I just want to state that love your channel. I've been following you for probably maybe about 4 or 5 years. I know you were originally known as Economic Incivility.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yes. You wrote a couple books about 1 or 2 books about fascism, if I stand corrected.
Yeah, so Italian fascism, and then a book on right-wing socialism. So.
Very cool. That's dope, man. Not many people understand the kind of the differences between socialism, fascism, and you kind of do it in a way that's easy for the normie to comprehend. And your quick little 10-minute, 20-minute takes on social observations, men and dating, women and men relationships. It's all great. Big fan. Much respect to you, and thanks for coming back on.
Yeah, likewise. Life is going well. I was actually, my schedule was a lot worse back in 2022, but now I feel that I have almost too much time. So it's like, there's a temptation to work more, but you can't work your life away, so.
Yeah, unfortunately, my job is like 24 hours. So my phone's ringing right now with work, and today's my day off. I've realized probably the past year or two that you can only give so much, and kind of being not available sometimes is to your benefit, and not always placating and trying to be a people pleaser, because you'll wind up just killing yourself mentally if you keep trying to think about the other one is what others perceive you as, and you just got to keep pushing forward. And kind of learning that now in my late 30s. So.
Yeah, I would say that sometimes there's this expectation where if you run a channel of any size, people assume that you're doing it as a full-time career. And any shortage, I mean, I remember back in the day, I tried making a video 5 times a week, and then people would go from clamoring that you need to do more, and they would say like, oh, well, this isn't as funny as the last one. I'm like, there's stuff that goes into this. And there was, in the space in particular, some angles of this space, as you know, it's like a mental asylum. And some of these people would be like, oh, you're not as active due to your schedule. Or in my case, a couple years back, one of my parents was on the verge of dying. So I'm like, obviously not on YouTube all the time. They're like, oh, you're in a conspiracy with the government against me. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you, man. I wish I had that much power. Like,
I was look, you're always gonna have the haters. Don't feed the trolls. I mean, that's it. Right. I don't respond to trolls. Maybe if someone makes a good point or cites me as being incorrect, I'll circle back and correct myself on a later stream. It's unfortunate. I have a Telegram group, and there's a lot of people that try messaging me and want to get to know me and try calling me. And dude, like it's no knock on you. It has nothing to do with you. It's more about me, and I can only give so much. And it's not I'm ignoring you. It's that I'm just busy in my own life. There's the online world, and then there's the real world. And maybe the last couple of years, moving back to New York, I've kind of segued away from the online world and realized, hey, there's a whole world out there. I mean, I'm looking at New York City right now, and there's how many people there? I should go out and actually meet some people in real life.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and then the big one I've come across is the people that are extraordinarily paranoid, and everything is like, oh, it's part of some grander scheme, and they aggrandize themselves like the world's out to get them specific. It's like, dude, calm down. You're just a normie. You might work a job, whatever. You get on the internet, it's fine. It's no big deal.
Well, I've been working for Mossad. That's the latest one.
Oh yeah,
Yes,
yeah. I know.
yes.
It was a couple months back. I know there was that drama with the other stream, and I'm just like, you know, granted, I'm skeptical of a lot of things, but at a certain point, and this is, I was going to bring this up in a video, but a couple years back, I read a book by this communist Yenta by the name of Talia Levin, and she openly admitted that she would go into these Wignat spaces or Inkwell adjacent manosphere spaces, and she would just accuse people of being feds. She would accuse people of having some twisted agenda because she knew the paranoiacs would then burn the whole house down. It's a very effective strategy, and I realize it more and more because I'm like, I'm not saying I had a perfect childhood, but I was a pretty stable family, situation. So I'm usually not out to get people. And then you find these types that are like playing both sides and searching for validation by kissing up to you and then also slagging you off elsewhere. It's very interesting, but a window into human psychology, if nothing else. So
Well, but, like 20 years ago, when they had AOL chat rooms, me and my friends and my father, for that matter, would go into these chat rooms and really just cause disharmony on purpose and just start laughing about it. And people tend to
right.
forget, like, there's people out there that do that for fun, for just to get a rise out of you. There used to be this guy called Pacific Ocean Asia, and he was a great YouTube personality, and he just kept feeding trolls, not realizing that these people are just messing with you. And he had a little
Yeah.
bit of a spur. He was a bit spurk,
Right.
he was on the spectrum, no doubt. And I would try and message him. I go, listen, you're detracting from what made you great and what made your channel aspiring and people wanted to listen to be making these response videos to people in the comment section. And eventually he basically deleted all of his content. There's some YouTube videos still floating out there, but look, you just what more can I say about it? I cannot really, I don't feed trolls. I did a show with this guy, Western Decline, who I think you mentioned in previous videos, if I stand corrected.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
So I did a couple shows with him, and yeah, he was the one that called me a Mossad agent. I'm like, dude, you're like super blackpilling, and I was trying to spin what he had to say in more of a positive light, like. And then it got into like you're 10 years older. What do you know? And you didn't have social media apps. I'm like, yeah, no, but like if you're gonna be in this echo chamber of doom scrolling and doom spiraling and blackpilling, like of course no woman's gonna want to date you. That's eventually gonna come off to people around you. So I try to make a clear demarcation from my online world to my personal world.
Well, and the truth be told, with that kind of thing, first of all, I find the trolls kind of flattering because I'm just this, very monotone individual, and some of these people are dedicated to me and have been for years. So it's a pat on the back. But what I would say is that we know the BP, there's a lot of validity to it, and many of us are probably not going to get our trad wife, 10 kids, happily ever after. I mean, if we're realistic, right? As
Right.
much as boomers will tell us otherwise. With that being said, when they start getting to the stage of writing off everything, like don't bother even trying to make money, just completely drop out. And I'm like, I don't even want to make a moral judgment, but at the beginning of your life as a man, especially, the worst thing you can do is just elect to do nothing, in my opinion, because through going out and exploring and trying stuff, if nothing else, you cultivate more interesting memories and you meet people. And that's kind of the point of life. Where when everything, this abused term, cope, it's like, yeah, well, people have been coping since the beginning of time, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like if you have a decent income, it's more easy to pursue your hobbies or you can travel. If you are, and through those hobbies, you might find satisfaction. I don't know if you're doing woodworking or like myself, writing. Everything doesn't have to end up with a woman. Like these guys are extraordinarily gynocentric, whether they realize it or not, because any of those of us who have had women, that if you build your life around them, you lose them, then what do you have? So it's important to not dilute and water down everything in life simply if it doesn't involve a woman, in my opinion. And they'll say it's mistal, but okay.
That's
So
exactly, you're
what's
basically
your alternative?
you're paraphrasing everything I said to that guy Western Decline and Thomas White. I go, why are you so hell bent and focused on women? Women sense that all you're doing is focusing on them, and they get turned off by it. Like you got to focus on yourself. I just did a show with a buddy of mine, Patrick, a couple nights ago, and he was kind of echoing the same sentiments. Like, worry about yourself, man. Like you can't. I understand the manosphere is hell bent on quantifying sex with look maxing and algorithms and stuff. But I know women with like PhDs who will base a guy and judge a guy off the shoes he's wearing and not so much how much money is in his bank or where he lives.
Exactly.
Women are feckled creatures to kind of truncate it. But you said something interesting a moment ago about your job in creating lasting experiences. Funny thing is, I had a lunch, like a business lunch, with a couple clients of mine, and they were saying, you're underpaid. Why don't you go work in Manhattan? This area is not really for you. You can make, $20,000, $30,000 more. And I'm like, true, but I don't think I will necessarily have the stories I can tell working Manhattan versus where I am today. Because I enjoy surrounding myself with characters, honestly. And that brings a lot of fulfillment in my life and enjoyment, having those type of experiences with those people versus, wagey cagey and making 200K, but your coworkers and clients are miserable and kind of like milk toast.
Yeah, I mean, my upbringing, my mom, she came from basically abject poverty. So naturally, she was really into being thrifty. And I think there's value to that. But there comes a point where you need to sometimes spend a little bit of money to have certain experiences. And there's nothing wrong with it inherently. The whole scrimp and save every little bit, be a minimalist, not as, basic practice of life, but be a bit of minimalist because you're trying to put a positive spin on you being poor and not wanting to change anything. I don't know about that. I think there is merit. And in the United States, granted, yes, the elites are going to be running everything, but there is more mobility here than in other countries. And people often forget that. They think they're living in a hellscape on the basis of one or two issues. Like there's actually some advantages to being the U.S. And like I said, the last couple of years in particular, it's been amazing. They usually say, oh, once you get past 25, it's over. Not really, because you start stacking resources, you have more options. And then if you invest in things that give you a sense of satisfaction, individual projects, whatnot, that can't be taken away from you. A lot of the issue in the BP space that I see is some of the guys are very young, and understandably, they don't maybe have experience. So they think, well, it's all about having a girlfriend, but there's a lot to life. And like I said, I guess I digress, but I think I would never encourage someone, as much as I do accept these realities, I'd never encourage them to just stop doing anything and exist as some organism. I don't want to say your mom's basement. That's just too stereotypical, but whatever, in the living room for the rest of your life, because one aspect might not be perfect. And if you never go outside and try to change anything, then of course you probably aren't, it's not going to come to you, essentially. So
yeah, the black pilling, look to a point, I agree with a lot of it. I tend to agree with the black pilling with the female aspect of things, just from my social observations and what I've experienced in my late 30s and looking back on all that stuff. Unfortunately, a lot of things that I've learned through the manosphere are true. But I guess I'm not saying there's hope, but it's a battle. It's harder. But you just gotta suck it up, buttercup.
yeah.
So listen, I kind of wanted to talk to you a little bit about the whole geo-maxing, expatriatism, passport bros, as you've mentioned. I first wanted to ask you what do your opinion on it? What have you noticed with people that are leaning towards leaving the United States? Those that are like under 40, looking for a greener pasture, looking for a Shangri-La in another country, and we kind of get the ball rolling from there, and we can dissect that topic for a bit.
Well, so did you see that clip that was being shared on Twitter about the Chad to Dad guy with the
No.
Filipina? All right, so this
yes,
dude,
yes, I did see a piece of
yeah.
it. Go on, yes, tell
Okay,
my
so
listeners.
so you've lived like full time overseas, so you might be able to give an insight to part of this. But what I found very interesting was that they said, okay, he was basically leading with his wallet, which is what you're typically going to do overseas, especially if you're trying to marry them. and you're that age, and they're going like, well, this guy, he should have been lifting weights. Oh, he should have been maintaining frame. And I'm like, well, you signed a contract to be with a woman, right? At a certain point, there's only so much you can do with that. And even the Philippines, they've started tightening their divorce laws, alimony, whatnot. It's not this paradise. Uh, but the other thing they say a lot of, and even people who are supposedly red pill or whatnot, they'll say, well, you shouldn't take her to the West. That's the mistake. And I really wonder, though, because if these women are growing up in, let's say, less developed countries where money talks, right, where they see people, probably their friends, maybe their relatives, selling ass growing up, do you really believe that just because you take them to because you keep them in that environment, they're incapable of screwing you over? It just strikes me as very naive, not to mention that the whole notion, especially as a younger man, that you're going to uproot your life, move away from your family, your friends, if you have any, you're not like an orphan or whatnot, and you're just going to go to this tropical country hoping that she's not going to pull the rug on you. I mean, that's very gynocentric. I mean, for some guys, maybe it makes sense, but it strikes me as almost desperation. If a woman has a certain character, she should be able to endure even if she's living in New York City. But if she's going to change just because of the geography of the territory, I mean, was she really any different in the end, or was it simply performative?
Well, there's a saying. Is what country you relocate to, what country you choose to relocate to, and I'll tell you what kind of person you are. Excuse me, just choking here.
Yeah.
And that says a lot. And a lot of people choose countries that have tropical climates. The easy low bearing fruit would be someplace in South America. But if you're relocating for a woman, you're already on the wrong path. Straight up. I
Right.
mean, that was a portion of it. I'd say about maybe like 20% of the reason why I relocated, but I just wanted to experience something different.
Yeah.
I was 23 when, no, I was 24 when I first went to Cambodia. I went there for 3 weeks to see my coworker of mine and kind of like a childhood friend. He got hooked up with the UN. He's still over there. He's been there for now maybe 15 years. And I felt when I was 24 that everything around me was wrong, and a lot of people were saying that it's a me problem. No, it's you. You just gotta find yourself. A lot of boomer talking points, and I'm like, no, this seems something's off. And it was actually my job at the time, where I was an intermediary between a wholesaler and general contractors, and I was just moving product from one place to another, and I'm like, I don't. This job doesn't make any sense. Like, why can't the wholesaler just go directly to the contractor? Why am I taking a piece from the top? I just felt like the economy and everything just was kind of artificial. On top of really kind of regressing in my early 20s, where I started smoking pot again and playing video games. I'm like, this has got to be more to life. So I wound up moving, and I set out certain goals for myself when I moved to Southeast Asia, and I achieved those goals. And I felt by the time I was 29, like I peaked living in a third world country. Like, the sky's the limit. Jobs are kind of scarce for foreigners. I did not want to teach, though I did teach part time, and that was basically it. Yeah, the female part of it was awesome, no doubt, especially when you're in your mid 20s, and there's all these women that are attracted to you. That was a lot of fun, and I made a lot of lasting impressions and experiences, and I still keep in touch with a lot of my friends over there. But I my experience is strictly with Southeast Asia. I cannot attest for South America. I probably would not want to do South America just because the crime,
Yeah.
and you just hear some of these horrible stories coming out of like Medellin, Colombia, and so on and so forth. But I see a lot of young guys thinking that they're gonna find what it is they're looking for elsewhere, and they forget that you're still gonna be the same you, just in a different relocation. So if you're predisposed to whatever, if you have like addictive personality, all those character flaws will be magnified when you relocate. And a lot of people that I knew wound up leaving Cambodia not under their own volition. I know two guys that wound up going to jail in Cambodia
Oh wow.
Praxor. They wound up being locked up. I mean, that doesn't sound pleasant to me. So that's kind of my general, kind of like my bird's eye view on it all.
Yeah, I've got, like I say, I went to, well, I geomaxed in Europe, had a lot of luck there. Geomaxed in El Salvador, which is also very successful. El Salvador, compared to a lot of other countries in the region, it's pretty stable, but of course they're basically living under martial law, so that might be part of it. And I would say that the people were extraordinarily polite. It was very orderly. You have armed guards everywhere, police or the military. Though the question becomes, let's say Bukele, if they do some kind of color revolution, they get rid of him. You never know how quickly he could switch back. And there's been plenty of examples where you had regimes that were kind of working out okay, but they rubbed up against some kind of interest, IMF or whatnot, and then they're removed, and then all of a sudden it becomes a hellscape once more. So I guess my point would be if you're going someplace, you need to make a good faith attempt to learn the language and try to integrate yourself to a degree. Because if you're just basically there, excuse me, as a random tourist, it's very easy to be taken advantage of. And you're seeing a lot of that in Colombia, where
Yeah.
these, I don't want to say strictly brothers, but of course the brothers make a lot of noise. They go, shaking the money, oh, here, making it rain. And are you surprised you're being targeted because they see you as an ATM? And this is what a lot of guys don't get, where they believe it's some magic dynamic where if you're a sub 5 in America, they're obsessed with you just because you're American or whatnot. Like they're living in, I would almost describe it as the way that Asian women were the way that Asian women were marketed perhaps in the 20s or 30s. Like, oh, they're so delicate and soft and they just want to serve men and there's not a wicked bone in their body. And it's like, maybe that was, I don't think it was ever actually the case, but especially now, I mean, everything's global.
Right.
Filipinas have smartphones. People are watching Filipina P on YouTube. They're seeing 90 Day Fiancé clips. Even the Roosh days, there were guys complaining they would go to Eastern Europe and these women were demanding more of them because they're finding out, yeah, guys think they can swoop in, pump and dump, and then leave. And, unless a woman really finds you attractive, she's probably going to want some resources in exchange for that. So.
During COVID, I had maybe like 4 or 5 women that I used to hook up with in Phnom Penh start like texting me on WhatsApp, and I'm like, I haven't spoken to you in like 3 years. Like, what the fuck are you messaging me now for?
Yeah.
And they were, they were my friends. I hooked up with them. And they were like, well, can you send me money? I'm like, fuck no, I'm not sending you money. Like, what are you, crazy? And then, you start speaking to them more and more about this arrangement. And lo and behold, there's like 10 or 15 dudes sending them money during the lockdowns. And that coincides with what you just said. Everything's global now.
Oh yeah, and actually recently had a chick started messaging me on Hinge, very good looking light skinned girl from Tanzania, like almost milky white skin. And she was like, yeah, I want to get married, this kind of thing. And I got a message from Hinge not long after that she was trying to pull a scam because even these girls, they're getting on the apps, they're changing their location, and they're trying to get money from guys, whatnot. So it's always been, I mean, to an extent, I don't want to be degrading, but to an extent, women have always been a commodity throughout history. But especially now with the means of communication, like you got to stop thinking they're so naive. And I believe that's the big problem. We want to think you're going to this village where the women are, unshaved and wearing a loincloth just waiting for you. I mean, come on, man. I mean, in fact, I have a friend from the Balkans, and he talked about when he came here in the 90s, he'd meet someone who works like in law enforcement, and the guy would be going, oh, so do you guys have electricity over there, or do you live in trees? And he's like, dude, what the hell? Like, this is how little you know about the world. And unfortunately, there's a lot of Americans that are just completely naive. So.
Well, what the question is I have is that what you're going for? Like, that's really the crux of my argument. Are you going there just to find a trad wife? Because again, if that's what you're going there for, they smell it on you. They're 5 car lengths ahead of you and knowing what you're trying to accomplish. Furthermore, you're assuming that their cultural norms and their cultural standards are the equivalent of yours. and they
Yeah.
see you as like you're an idiot. And a lot of Europeans uh, detest Americans for this I guess Pax Americana. I don't know how you want to describe it, but you're bringing the worst aspects of American society to those countries you're visiting, whereas Europeans don't necessarily do that. I guess maybe just Europeans in general have a better grasp of the globalized worlds than Americans, because Americans for the most part don't travel. But that was a big complaint I got from Europeans, was that you're bringing this whole neo-Victorian bullshit to the third world, and the women of those countries are looking at you like a greenhorn. That was a common term I heard while living there. You greenhorn.
Well. So funny enough, do you know who Matt Forney is?
Yes, of course.
So it was funny because I used it one time as an example of what, like, you don't want to be an LBH, like a loser back home, basically someone who's doesn't have a lot of self-awareness and is pulling this go to the Philippines thing. But he was actually roasting that Chad to Dad guy on Twitter. So it's funny how everything's kind of interconnected at some level. Now, in terms of Europeans, I do think they are more cultured. I will
Yeah.
say this. My first overseas trip by myself years ago was Dominican Republic. And I was in Boca Chica. And I just remember there were a couple Germans, but mostly these geriatric French guys, with a freaking pot belly, all bronzed out. And
Right,
they'd
yeah,
be,
right.
you have like the girl that is probably not even 18 walking up to them. She's like, "Te gusta masaje?" Like massage. And he'd be like, "Ah, oui, oui." And I'm like, oh, this is just, yeah, you want to throw up. It's but that's what they do. And you'll see like young, attractive mulatto or black women leading around these guys that have to be in their 60s or 70s, and they're all giddy and giggling. And I'm like, ah, man, it's money talks. That's what I try to tell people. I don't want to rain on anyone's parade. And I've always said, I don't sit there being like, I hope you fail. But if you go over there with this mentality where you've been ignored by women, you've never had a girl in the West who was really infatuated with you outside of you paying her bill, or excuse me. And then you go over there, you're going to be easy prey because they're going to say like, yep, this is a sucker who's never had a girl treat him
Right.
nice. So,
Yeah, and then the women. Let's just let's use the DR for example. It's the what is it, machoism? What the hell's a chacho? What the hell they call their guys?
machismo.
Machismo, right? Their guys are machismo. So it's a reflection. It's mirroring the opposite sex over there. So if you're not necessarily like a quasi machismo, you're going to fail right on your face. Like for like Dominican women, again, because I'm from New York, they don't like beating around the bush like American women. They're much more pragmatic in their approach. For us, we would call that trashy, but for them, that's just the way it is. So when you're constantly beating around the bush, what it is you want, whether you're looking for marriage or a one night stand, it doesn't work. Period. And I just find dude, I think a lot of this kind of took off with that guy who was in, what is it, Romania or Hungary, the Andrew Tate. I think Andrew Tate
Yeah.
kind of blew the doors wide open on the whole concept of moving to Eastern European countries. Rushavi obviously relocated. I don't even know if he's on the internet anymore. And so a lot of men who consume, red pill, black pill, manosphere type of content, they start gravitating towards as this is a way. It's a escapism. You're basically running away from yourself by relocating to another country. Sorry if I
Yeah.
was
And
long-winded there for a
no,
moment.
I mean, in Eastern Europe in particular, that's one of those areas where I would say you definitely want to know the language because Eastern European women are renowned for being involved in the sex trade. And I mean, there's obviously like a lot of drug trafficking there as well. So you don't know exactly what you're going to get. It's the whole Forrest Gump with the chocolates type thing. I think that, but even presenting that, I notice if you simply try to be somewhat balanced and nuanced with people, they'll claim that you're being negative. I mean, this is separate, but I did a video on Trump's cabinet, and I was trying to say the pluses and minuses, and people were like, "Oh, you're so bitter." I'm like, dude, I'm just telling you what this guy probably is going to do. Tulsi Gabbard, oh, she's so base. Like Tulsi Gabbard, her political career was funded by the BJP interests and the RSS, like these Hindu terrorist organizations. So you think she's going to be objective when it comes to India. I don't know. So like having
Obviously not
knowledge.
with J.D. Vance is married to a Poojit.
Yeah, that's just it's embarrassing. I mean, although I'll say in his defense, if you're at Harvard or Yale Law School, I think it was, your best options as a regular kind of sub 5 male, which he's tall, but his face is sub 5,
Right.
is going to be either a Grace Chang like Chinese girl, or maybe you're going to have to convert and be a member of the tribe, or you're probably going to end up with an Indian girl. Like there's not going to be a whole lot of options realistically. So unless he wanted to try to pick up some, like what was that guy on Twitter saying a couple months ago? Oh, just drive through a small town and ask out every cashier and waitress. Unless he's going to do that, people tend to date within their class. So that's just not so
You're also
surprising.
cornering that poor girl. She's working behind a McDonald's counter. She's got nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, and she's working. Really awkward. I've learned not to do that when I was younger. I'm like, oh, she's working, not really actually interested in you. She's there to serve you your
Yeah.
coffee or your slice of pizza. Please go away.
Yeah. I think we all as men kind of want to believe stuff about ourselves though, because I mean, I even have my dad. He's like almost 70, and he'll be talking about like, oh yeah, this girl, she's like 18, and she's like flirting with me or whatnot. It's like I'm pretty sure she was just giving you your coffee, but
It's that's the boomer.
but I don't want to deflate that because I've been guilty of that myself sometimes, and sometimes it's better to live with the slight in your mind a little bit. It distracts you from the world a tad. So
My father would always try setting me up with women when I was like in my early 20s. Oh, I met this really cute girl. Oh, that's a funny story. You ever heard of Friendlies?
oh yeah,
Okay, so there's a Friendlies up the block from me. And my dad's like, there's this girl named Allie. She's so cool. Like, and he's describing her to me and stuff. I would really want you to meet her. I think you guys would get along. And it was a girl like she was a couple years younger than me, and my dad didn't know the fact that, and I knew her personally, that she was actually a stripper on the side at night. I'm like,
oh
yeah,
man,
that's
man.
Allie, and she's she's a stripper at night. It's like that's why she's so like very cordial and funny, and she knows how to take a joke and stuff. So
Yeah.
just to show, like the whole boomer aspect of things, that they're just completely like kind of like ossified in time, where kind of setting you up, like your parents, or like your parents would obviously try to look out what's best for you. They would want to see you happy, finding a partner and such. But those now, like, courting is now like considered like an indifferent and creepy behavior, unfortunately, especially for guys that are not high on the look scale.
Well, I saw the most bizarre profile. It was a girl. She said that if you're courting me, then we're not exclusive. If you're dating, then we are. And I was like, isn't that kind of backwards a little bit? But yeah, my dad did something similar in Costco. I remember I said, yeah, there's a nice looking girl working there, kind of just like, off the cuff. And then he went there later and he was like, oh, this is a girl. Are you single? Because like, I'm like, dude, why would you do that, man? Like, I don't know any woman who's going to respect that at all. Like, oh yeah, your parent made the approach. So yeah, I was just like, okay, I'm not going to that Costco again then. So
Well, I think circling back to the whole geomaxing and becoming an expatriate, there's I can see why men would want to move to another country, because they're assuming that a lot of these women are not using social media in the same vein as American women are. So in like and again, I was in Southeast Asia like right before the Tinder explosion, where now I think probably a good portion of the population of women are using dating apps and Hinge and Bumble and such. But you have to realize that in other countries they don't use apps. They don't. If you use like let's say you use Hinge in New York City, you're not gonna find like a off the boat Chinese woman jumping onto Bumble. You see what
mhm.
I'm saying? You're not gonna bump into the Guatemalan who's got a Tinder profile and she's looking for a nice white dude who's middle of the road working in a fucking cubicle making 50K. Like that just doesn't exist. So a
Yeah.
lot of like social media and dating apps for that matter are really just regulated towards people that have been assimilated into the United States and its ethos.
Yeah, one thing I did notice in Central America is that it's not uncommon to meet girls who like that's a minor point, but they don't have like unlimited data plans. So like the one
Right.
she had to connect to Wi-Fi for her Uber or whatever. So after I'd smashed, I paid for the Uber or whatever. I think it was like $10. So I mean that does happen. But once more, if you go to a country like that, unless, and maybe that's the argument, if you properly want to relocate, is that you have more time to kind of become a regular at places. But if you're there for like most of these guys, oh, I saved up for 5 days in Colombia. You know, I mean, yeah, you can go by the clock tower and meet them, but even there, I think they started changing the laws because they said that these women were asking a certain price, and the guy was saying sure, and then after he's trying to cut the price by half or by 75%. So, yeah, it's
What's the just like living in Southeast Asia, uh, the women that would gravitate towards you are not necessarily the women that you'd ever want to really be in a relationship with. Also, the women that you would necessarily would want to be in a relationship with are kind of off limits. There's a lot of uh, cultural dynamics, courting, where you're not necessarily going to go out on a date, air quote. If you were to go on a date with like a regular Thai woman or a woman from Vietnam, they would have like a chaperone with them, and
right.
to you it's like, oh, what do you, who's your friend, like, is this like a way of like me not getting any, like, is this a way of it's a form of security for them.
Yeah.
And and then for you to start actually going on a date with a regular province girl, they're abiding by social norms that are foreign to you, because in the United States it's so individualistic that you naturally assume she has a right to choose. It's her life. No, she's answering to her family. Same with Dominican women and any woman from South America. A lot of decent women for that, ones that you really want to be in a long-term monogamous relationship with. They're pretty Catholic, dude.
Right.
you know?
Yeah, well, so I went out in DR with this girl. She was obviously like she was mixed, but her face, and that's one thing I do like about DR women is when they have like a European face. Um, I met a couple like that, but the one that I went out with, I think she was maybe
So 19.
19.
You weren't in Santo Domingo, is what you're saying?
I mean, I visited there, but there are still like here and about. You'll see some of them, but this
Yeah,
one,
yeah,
she
yeah.
was like 19, like very feminine. She shows up, but she came with her mom, and her mom was like probably 5 months pregnant or whatnot. And her mom was kind of like, trying to, as you said, chaperone the whole thing. And I was like, wait, am I marrying your daughter or you? I don't know. But I mean, some of them will be upfront. Like even if you tried to chat with them before going, they'd be like, you need to send me $100 or whatever. I'm like, yeah, screw that. Not happening. So, uh,
Or guess what? We're having dinner. Where? At my house. You can meet my dad.
right. But
So
I mean, and so I guess if you come across that, it could potentially be a good sign. But what I would ask you, having been in Cambodia, did you find when you're a foreigner, I mean, obviously they might see, okay, this is a ticket out of poverty potentially, but did you find from the men any hostility being with their local women?
no,
Okay.
I didn't. The woman I was dating was heck, she was repulsed by Cambodian men. She
Okay.
wanted nothing to do with a Cambodian guy. And basically what happens is like if you hook up with a Cambodian chick who's like normal, like middle, air quote, middle class, like she has a couple cows, she's got a plot of land. Um, they would radio back to headquarters. Hey, listen, these white guys, they don't beat you, and they don't ask me a million questions on where I am, and they leave me alone. It's great, and they got money,
Right.
and they're stable, and they like that. Even with the Dominican women, for that matter, a lot of South American women do not like machismo at all.
Right.
From the women that I speak to, working and living in New York City, they find it repulsive, machismo culture. And for the guys on the manosphere, that's kind of what they think women like.
Yeah. Now, the worst thing is the guys that try to put up that front, but they just, they can't back it up. And it becomes really cringe. I mean, I've seen it more times than I'd like to admit, even overseas. But
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot of like quasi machismo guys in New York City. You see them. They work in barber shops. They don't have they don't have like $1 in their wallet. Like it's like just blasting horrible music out of there, circa or late '90s Acura Integra. I don't know any woman that would find that attractive yet. That's what most men do down there, and a lot of them do it here in New York City as well.
Well, there was a guy I knew. He was a big, Trump cell type, and he basically from I think his friend was maybe with the sister of this girl and brought her over from Cambodia. And man, I mean, she did a number on him. She's like, he got to the point where he was like asking coworkers for money because she was blowing out his credit card limit, emptying his bank account, all this kind of crap. I mean, I guess he got a kid out of it. So if that's what you're looking for, it's okay. But I don't know. I just
That guy that got fleeced by the Filipino,
yeah.
he was what, 20 years older than the woman he decided to shack up with? I mean,
Yeah,
there was
but man,
there was a significant age difference between the two of them.
but she was brutal. I'm sorry. Like that's another thing that bothers me is when I see some of these Passport Bro channels and they'll be flexing with this woman. I'm like, man, I'm sorry. That's what you left the U.S. for. If I'm going to go through that, especially to marry, I understand if it's just a quick pump and dump. But if you're going to marry them and you're getting with like a 3 out of 10 over there, I can't rationalize that personally.
Well, I've covered this quite a bit on my channel. The older you get, the more sexually retarded you become. So
Oh
I
yeah.
saw a lot of older guys that are like boomers, basically, any 55 and older. They'd be like, "Oh my God, did you see that woman? Like, what are you talking about? What? That woman over there? Look at her. I mean, what? That stump over there? That what they? She's
Yeah.
beautiful." And he, looking at me, dumbfounded, like I don't see the beauty in this woman. I go, you need, are your glasses? I think you need to go back in the U.S. and get your new prescription of glasses because the glasses you're buying here are definitely not working out. Oh, you're crazy, man. I'd marry her in a heartbeat. She's
Yeah.
so gorgeous. And I see it. I saw it quite a bit over there. Again, these guys, these type 2 diabetic types, using a cock ring, and they're just with these repulsive women. But in the same vein, like some of those women kind of just want like a dude, really. You just want some of them just really just want a relationship. So they kind of,
Right.
it's twofold. One is the women that shack up with Europeans. It's either one, they're the prostitutes, or they're kind of more like had a couple kids, deadbeat dad. I just want someone who's somewhat stable in my life. And if he's a white dude, there's a good chance that there's some type of pay dirt.
Right.
That's just
Which
my 2 cents. I saw it quite a bit over there. But in the same token, I'd say half of those guys got fleeced by the locals. Usually her family winds up fleecing them. One friend of mine, he had like 4 or 5 kids with a Khmer woman, not attractive. She was like sold fruit on the side of the road or whatever, and he spoke fluent Khmer, and he would go to the provinces to see the family, and he would buy them TVs and scooters, and basically take care of the whole extended family, and they would talk shit about him while he's in the room, and he would speak in Khmer to them because like, I understand everything you're saying, and he I remember him telling me, he goes, the family goes, yeah, shut up over there, you don't know what you're talking about. Anyway, he's an asshole. Why did he get me a 32-inch screen TV? It should have been a 42-inch. Dude, it was so funny. They don't. I remember when I was teaching, and my students were a couple years younger than me. They were all entry college students. And a chapter of the book was about the Apollo mission. And none of them gave a flying fuck about us landing on the moon, if you believe that we landed on the moon.
yeah.
And they're like looking at me, dumbfounded that I couldn't understand that they didn't find that fascinating. Like education to them and learning about the outside world is just second. It's kind of yeah whatever. It's not important to them. Like things that we find important, striving for, like a better meaning, better understanding of the world, science, so on and so forth. Whether that's the Buddha in them or just the general low IQ of a Khmer, I don't really know. But I remember that was it was interesting that day.
Well, so I had smashed this girl from Nepal, and her sister was back in the old country. She was applying to get a government job. And no joke, they said, "So what's an inspirational quote?" And she put something from Adolf Hitler because to them, like, there's no awareness of that. I mean, if you've ever been to one of these like bazaars that are run by South Asian people, and you can literally buy, because the swastika obviously comes from their religion, it's an ancient symbol. And I've even come across some girls called swastika, and I was like, man, that would be such a great troll, introduce your girl, hey, it's swastika, because it's not seen in the same light. And that's really, culturally speaking, educational systems, they're going to emphasize different aspects of history. So we make the assumption you see a swastika and everyone's like ducking and covering. And it's like,
Horrified, right?
yeah, no, not quite.
Yeah, in Cambodia, because of the garment factories, they pump out. Like they would joke around. Like in the garment factories, they make their own shirts, like with stupid quotes and shit. And there was a brief period for a few months where everyone was wearing the swastika, the whole red, black, and white, like
Right.
imprinted on a T-shirt. And you see all these teenagers, riding around on their motorcycles with a huge swastika shirt, black shirt with red. I was like, what the? And they have no context whatsoever what that means or anything.
Yeah.
So anyway, digressing. So tell us. So today was the inauguration day, and I know that you've talked a little bit about Trump, and you briefly mentioned it earlier. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your 2 cents on Trump's second term, and what's your crystal ball saying about what we may expect in the coming years?
Well, first of all, I don't know if maybe I mentioned that before we went live, but what was up with Melania's costume? I was
I
just
didn't
like,
even see.
man.
I'm going to be straight up with you. I didn't watch it today.
Well, honestly, I slept through it, so I didn't see it live. But she looked like a character from either The Omen or some Asian horror film or whatnot. I was like, what? Why are you wearing that hat? No one can see your eyes and all that shit. So, and then they said he didn't put his hand on the Bible, and so there's that Donnie Darkened Twitter page where he claims that Trump is the Antichrist or whatever. I mean, obviously that's a little bit out there. But what I would say is, it's interesting, and I was pretty confident he was going to win back in race right after he got convicted in New York, because you kind of saw this shifting in terms of the legal outcomes. A lot of lifelines were tossed his way, and the Silicon Valley types were aligning with him, which was surprising because he was supposedly this demon on earth. But I think what you're going to get, like with politics, I'm fairly agnostic. I say, see what the merits are. I mean, Bush was pretty terrible, but I guess he gave you some tax cuts on your stocks if you trade those things. What's notable, the Democrats have already helped push through 2 immigration bills, the Lake and Riley Act, and I think it's the Nancy Mace one on sexual assault, which they did not carve out, at least thus far, more exceptions for asylum seekers. And that's very beneficial because our asylum system is just bereft with fraud, especially TPS. So there really should be a separate law addressing that. But I was a little bit shocked about his having that success early on. Now the question is, are we going to get more of this vocal action towards illegal immigration, and they're going to rug pull us when it comes to legal migration? And that's what it was, that little kerfuffle at the end of the year where the H-1Bs seemed to be about, that
It
they're
was
planning.
spectacular, by the way. The memes were just legendary.
Oh yeah, because even Joni Ernst and Mike Lee during the first term, they were pushing the Eagle Act. They were trying to do this unlimited Indians into the United States agenda. So can you really trust conservatives if they are backed by Google and Facebook? Obviously, Elon Musk is going to have a big role there. But that's going to be, I'm going to watch that closely. But if nothing else, I guess those are beneficial. And if we get like a defunding of sanctuary cities bill, if we get some changes to visas, I mean, like I said, you're not going to get 100%. And sometimes if you insist on 100%, you get nothing. So, but
You mentioned Joni Ernst. I remember her like a little over 10 years ago. She was like the first politician that actually mentioned Agenda 21. She's out of Missouri, right? If I stand, or Iowa?
Iowa,
Right.
yeah.
And I remember her speaking about Agenda 20, and she went into gave a nice dissertation on it. And this is like kind of right after the whole Tea Party movement, and I was fascinated with the Tea Party movement. That was like in the what is that, 2010, 2011. And I was like, wow, Joni Ernest, holy shit. Like, I can't believe it. Actual politician talking about sustainable development and stuff. And then when around, as soon as she got into office, she backpedaled on everything, on everything. I even think Trump courted her to be the VP and she said no.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing I think we mentioned a bit was the his dreams of expansion and again, I'm not going to be conceited enough to pretend like, oh, this is coming from me, but I will say some of the stuff that I talked about in my book on conservatism, probably not originating from there, but the Trump people are talking about it. Russell Vought, he said we need to go after the Impoundment Act, which is a very good sign. I think, is going to do an order on birthright citizenship. That's going to be the big one if they can get it through. I'm not confident that Amy Coney Barrett is going to support him, but hopefully I'm proven wrong. That aside, people think it's nonsensical because these are the ones who follow the rules-based liberal world order,
Right.
the ones who say the post-Soviet system, nothing can change. And if you have any understanding of history, which most people don't, Machtpolitik is the name of the game. So given our financial position as a country, we cannot afford to sit there and go, oh, we're just going to go libertarian mode and fortress America and completely close off because our financial position is precarious if no one is intimidated by us anymore. This is why Pompeo's book I recommended, because you say he's a neocon, really not exactly.
No,
There's
not
more
really.
nuance to it. That if you have the ability to influence other countries, they're less likely to go in the direction of BRICS. Like you saw that with Millet, he just backed out of joining BRICS. And I have some of these guys who insist to me, BRICS is the future and America is going to collapse. I'm like, well, you're making a lot of assumptions that may or may not be true. Whether he takes over Canada and certainly Greenland, the best defense the Danes had was the head of their nationalist party. He goes, well, they don't want to lose our social welfare. Yeah, I don't see that being the reason they're going to turn down the U.S. If Musk says he's going to do some mining operation and give them a more high-tech economy, I mean, there are like 60,000 people living there. I think they're going to follow the strong horse, and it could be very interesting. It could be very wise.
Why on earth is he talking about sacking Greenland and Canada, and then what is it? Rename the Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America. To me, like it's like the imperialism aspect of it. Like most Americans wanted Trump, at least in 2016, to be more isolationist, to impose tariffs, to try to bring jobs home. Remember there was that whole video of what was it, Carrier air conditioner. It was right before Trump got elected in 2016, where they announced that we're moving our plant to Monterrey, Mexico, and everyone just went ballistic. So it's like we're not getting 2006 Trump. I get that, and I was I loved what he stood for. I coming from New York, I understand his background probably better than most Americans. So for for Google, Facebook, Amazon to be now supporting him when he was the devil, 3-4 years ago, I kind of take a step back and be like, wait a second, there's something else going on. And then again, he's talking about sacking Greenland. Why do you think this is a topic that he's mentioning all of a sudden?
Well, I guess we could go back to, was it Mosca, the elite theory, or even after that, the rotation of elites theory, which I definitely saw that playing out. I'm not going to get into whether 2020 was rigged or not. I have my own disagreements with people, but it was interesting at that rally right before the inauguration. I think maybe on Sunday or Saturday, Trump said something about Musk. Oh, he was in Pennsylvania for a month, and he's so good with computers, and he knows how the voting machines work. And people were going, well, are you trying to say that maybe they rigged it for you? I don't know. We don't have to go there. But the point being, it's an acknowledgement of the fact that you have an empire and you can either have a managed decline, which I think some of the things Biden did were kind of pointing that direction.
Yeah. Obama
Trump,
also.
Yeah. Trump, I think, is trying to keep the dream alive. And if you can check Russia, because granted, consider the source, but I read that Autocracy Inc. book just recently by Anne Applebaum. Obviously, she's more of a liberal internationalist, but she was pointing out that you go to these African countries and a lot of their media is basically bankrolled by China and Russia. So they believe whatever the Russians are saying. I'm not a one-dimensional anti-Russian type, but they do lie and they do meddle, and this is indisputable. And so you have to say as a country, you don't have to necessarily go to war with them, but you have to keep them on their heels a little bit. Otherwise, they're going to go for their own agenda. Putin is not some pro-Caucasian savior of
Right.
Christianity in the West. So with that, checking them when it comes to Greenland, Panama Canal, I don't know if he's going to really invade there. I think they'll find some kind of settlement. But I do believe Venezuela is on the chopping block.
Yeah.
They wanted to do it in 2020. It didn't quite materialize. And the other thing I said, that's why people were claiming that I was a shill. I said, I think Iran's also in the target reticle. And people are like, oh yeah, you're just dude. I mean, so far from what we can see, Israel's foreign policy has been pretty successful in the region.
Yeah.
And Iran is weaker now than at any time, probably since the beginning of the Iran-Iraq War. So we'll see what happens, but I think it's heading in that direction. And you might say, oh, it's all for the good of the tribe. I don't necessarily entirely disagree, but what might be good for the tribe might be in the interest of some American elites, if not the regular guy who's going to be drafted to fight for them. So,
Well, what was it, about a month ago? The whole drone scare, that was the drones over New Jersey.
yeah.
There was a politician saying that Iran has a secret aircraft carrier off the eastern seaboard, flying these drones over the United States. And I'm like, what are you like? I never heard of something more ridiculous in my life. Yet, for a politician to be out there actually stating something so far fetched is alarming to me. And I don't listen. The evangelical crowd, I get it. They're beholden to AIPAC. I understand that, but the majority of Americans, whether right or left, have kind of had it with Israel's foreign policy, with the tail wagging the dog.
Right. Well, and I get that. I do point out, and this is again where I don't know if you've interacted with Wignats, and maybe that's an unfair term. Maybe it's too derogatory. Let's just call them counter Semites. This is what I find. If you even slightly point out that those folks are being successful, they'll claim that, oh, you're against us. You're just trying to push your own interests. And I'm saying, look, you've got to learn from people. In the tail end of the 1890s, there were about 4,000 Jews in the Holy Land. And they go from that to displacing a majority into the hundreds of thousands, being able to dominate the region, being able to bend most superpowers, even the supposedly based Russia, to their will. And they've been doing what most people would probably describe as some kind of ethnic cleansing the last year or so, under the nose of the entire world with no serious repercussions. You don't have to agree with them morally, but you need to potentially learn from them. In
Right.
fact, those Germans from the 30s and 40s, surprise, surprise, a lot of their policies, you could argue, were lifted from traditional Jewish doctrine, like banning exogamous unions, having an economic system that would benefit their own kind first and foremost, not like, well, we've got to be the basket of the world. And they said openly, there is a hierarchy on the planet and we're at the top of it. And sometimes you have to just cut through all that nonsense. So people, and I guess it's because a lot of these counter Semites have no power, they're just frustrated. But if you want to change things, you're going to have to learn and emulate to an extent. And if you just want to constantly be moaning and whinging, okay, but nothing's going to change in the short term. Maybe politically, maybe if we get enough of these, Arab refugees, they're going to outvote the AIPAC. But it's just, I don't know.
What did you think of the fall of Syria? How quick that happened?
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the things I'd already pointed to, that this was supposedly the guy. He had lasted for so long, he was invincible, and you had evidence of Ukraine being there, of obviously our own agencies and Mossad. So, is it really such a surprise? And is this not another falling domino that is serving their agenda? But was it just meant to happen and it had been long enough and they'd been weakened, or was it kind of orchestrated? I tend to believe it was somewhat orchestrated. I want to see with Ukraine what happens, because obviously that's of great importance to Russia. And the fact, some people have argued that the fact that Russia had to deploy more resources to the Ukraine conflict, that's why they pulled back a bit in Syria. And really, the Russian Air Force was one of the main reasons why Assad was able to last as long as
Yep.
he could. So,
Well, now I was followed the war in Syria up until around when ISIS kind of came to the scene, and I was They were spread out. The Syrian Arab army was spread thin. Russia is certainly the backing of Russia really pushed them forward to really drive ISIS out. And then you had Trump come to power, which kind of like, I guess the dirt state funds dried up. And then for this to kind of like kick the stool out from underneath Syria right before Trump came to power, I think that was probably a deliberate move by the State Department to kind of destabilize the incoming administration.
Yeah. Now, do you agree with the people who say Obama's failure to observe the red line is what incentivized Putin to go after Ukraine?
No, I actually think probably the generals at that time they weren't at. Obama purged a large swath of the upper echelon of the United States military apparatus. We know that. There was the DEI hires. I think the head of the United States Navy is a black lesbian or some shit. I don't know if she's still in power or not. And he started picking all these people off that would kind of be a kind of like stop him from what he was trying to achieve by pushing this global homo agenda. And the few generals and admirals that still had some gumption told Obama, like, the American people are never gonna go for this, man. Like, seriously, you're gonna have to figure something out. Do your drone strikes, send in the Navy SEALs. But if you're talking about mechanizing divisions of the United States military for Syria or for Ukraine, you've lost your damn mind.
Yeah, it was interesting. I think the UK Parliament was the one that voted down their involvement in Syria, which I was kind of surprised after the Blair Bush era. It's like you actually care what the Parliament says, but
No, but
you know,
here's the thing, and I was reading an article about this. You can keep sending these Team Teal 6, Delta Force, Green Berets to do your bidding to an extent, to a point. But the bulk of the United States military is not the Navy SEALs. And I think Americans tend to like wax poetics about the, our special forces. But when you're talking actually ground trench warfare, it's not going to be the Navy SEALs. It's going to be, fucking was it Shamika and Billy Bob from West Virginia and from Alabama that are going to wind up doing your fighting.
right.
So like we kind of are obsessed with our special forces, but even that's kind of been destroyed by woke culture and whatnot. So like now you see what's going on like with California and obviously the proverbial backlash of DEI hires. We've rolled it out so far the past 4 or 5 years that dialing it back, it's just going to be like a slow flame. It's not going to be resorting back to what the United States military was 20 years ago when we invaded Iraq.
Yeah, and it's sad the extremes to which it went. So my brother was in the military during when we were taking all the Afghan refugees, and they had them at some base where they were basically watching over them, and they knew that in the tents these Muslims were going at it with boys, and they were like, "Yeah, you can't do anything. You can't get in there. You're only
That's
allowed
their
to send."
culture.
And they were like, "Oh, you can only send Shaniquas in there, like the female soldiers." And Shanique was like, "Yeah, we ain't doing that." And I was like, "Well, yeah." And I try to remind people because they always say it's just a neocon meme, which there's some truth to it. All the uh, talking up how the radical Islam, they hate you because you're free. But you can look at the history of Islam. Raymond Ibrahim has a good book, Sword and Scimitar. And from the very get-go, they have been trying to wipe out Europeans and just non-Muslims in general. The idea that they were just fighting defensive wars is absolute nonsense.
Do you think it was? Do you think it has to do with the Ottoman Turks kind of putting the cap on that shit?
In terms of putting cap on.
Let's go to World War One. They only when the Battle of Gallipoli
Yeah.
and the Dardanelles, the Turkish military actually only called for jihad once, and that was at Gallipoli. They never once viewed this war as a holy war, and going like the history of the Turks kind of dominating the Arabs because they view the Arabs as just lazy and stupid because there's a lot of Turk Arab infighting. Do you think that the Turks were the ones that kind of put a lid on the whole jihad and shipper sloppy jihad?
I think to an extent, but like for instance, the gentleman I know, his grandmother, I believe it was, or great grandmother, she had a picture where literally they would make saddles out of human skin from Christians, and they would ride them around. And there's a painting depicting this in the part of, I think it was in Serbia, where they were Ottomans. They were basically skinning priests alive. So maybe you'd say that to the extent that the regime was trying to cooperate, it was a little bit different. Obviously, right after, or as they started going to decline, I should say, you have what they did to the Armenians.
Well,
I
that was a backlash to the Battle of Al Akbar Mountain. The Russians like
correct, yeah.
skull fucked the Turks there, and then when they got off the, I guess when the battle ended, they were like, oh look, there's some Armenians. And they took their aggression out on the Armenians.
You're right. But if you look at like so the entirety of the Ottoman Empire, and maybe less so, but not even. I mean, if you look at the reaction to the uprising in Bulgaria, I mean, it was incredibly sadistic what they were doing to people. And you could say, well, that's what you do when you have a rebellion. But I just my experience with Muslim apologists is that they're all pathological liars. And so you really have to be armed with appropriate information because they will just spin endlessly trying to justify how, Islam is this. I've heard everything from Muhammad was a feminist, progressive, and well, he was a conservative. He believed in family values. And I mean, I really believe if you look at the life of Muhammad, assuming he existed, a lot of his theology seemed to be almost a response to his own problems where he was
Yes.
trying to justify,
Right.
oh, this girl might be cheating on me. Well, God says, no, she's not capable of that. And the guy that she was supposedly sleeping with is impotent. Well, that's obviously convenient. So,
What is do stay away from the rosy bush, for the rosy bush is a Jew. Like I was like, wow,
uh,
it's
yeah,
definitely, definitely a lot of Jew hatred in his writings. So he got a lot of beef with them. He was I don't know, conned by some merchant or some shit, and it made him hate them so much. Well, let me. Okay, so talking a little bit about Islam, dude. Like, I don't know how bad it is in England. I don't really speak to that many Pommies, but dude, they got a serious problem over there, man. And I don't know whether it's the Church of England just really just completely collapsing in on itself, but you can't like I don't want to keep mentioning the Jew thing, but England's problems and Europe's problems, you can't necessarily blame it on Israel and the Borg and the Zog. You know what I mean?
I guess what they'll say is you've heard this argument. It's where right wing Jews stir up trouble in the Middle East, and then left wing Jews demand the refugees be led into Western countries, which there's some truth to that. At the same time, though, a lot of these people in the UK are just coming because they were from former Commonwealth countries, and so they have those established relationships. And it's a very interesting element because you can go back to, I think it was Sudan at the early stages of the First World War, because people would say, well, the war was driven by the tribe. And you had the British officials telling Sudanese Muslims that you've got to fight the Germans because they're being controlled by the Jews. So it's like, even their own propaganda was very much aligned with that. And I think it's the same problem which we made the assumption, especially post World War II, ethnicity, race is irrelevant. It's just about these ideas. And you might have heard a boomer tell you, well, that guy from Botswana, he's a conservative Christian. He agrees with you on gay marriage. It's like, that doesn't mean you want him in your country. And that's the beauty, perhaps, of a lot of these religions. Certainly with Islam, there was recently a clip on Twitter of Baltimore Muslim couples, and it was just like dysgenic central. And you going, do you necessarily want these people in your country just because they might co-sign you on, like, they don't like Israel or they don't like gays? Because you see a lot, and this is my biggest criticism of Groypers, it's the oppose everything America just because of a relationship. Like, yeah, but I don't want to live with a bunch of Muslims. I've known many of them, and I don't consider them trustworthy people. So, I mean, where do you go from there? I understand enemy of my enemy is my friend, but if the consequence of that is welcome these people into your countries, and down the road, you're gonna suffer from it.
Well, I'm friends with a dude from Lebanon. He's around our age, and I was talking to him a little bit about what's going on in Syria. It was around the time that what was it? There was some massive explosion in Lebanon, in Beirut, and no one really got to the bottom of it. Some freighter blew up, and it was catastrophic. So I was talking to him a little bit about it, and kind of devolved into us talking about Syria. I go, well, do you support Hezbollah and do you support Assad? And he's like, fuck no. Why would I do that? I go, well, they're fighting Israel, and you got to protect the Palestinians. He goes, look what the Palestinians did to Lebanon. He go, what?
Right.
Most Americans don't realize the Lebanese civil war was because of Palestinian refugees. And now, what is it? Like 40% of their country is now is Muslim, when it was predominantly a Christian country not 50, 60 years ago.
Oh yeah. And that's like a lesson from that I brought up before is when a lot of these Christians, instead of being unified, they were all about their own little sectarian interests. And in many cases, they were upper class economically, so they didn't want to get their hands dirty. And that's what happened. They started infighting. A lot of them got killed during that civil war. Bashir Gemayel was assassinated. He was
Yeah.
the last strong leader they had, and then his brother succeeded. His brother was kind of weak, signed the agreement that took away most of the presidency's powers. So even there, and that was part of, who was it, Sharon's idea, just that you have to cultivate a strong Christian state as a buffer, as a balancing act between Jordan and other nations. And I think sometimes grand strategy flies right over the head of people because they resort just to emotionalism or short-term interests. It's the eternal human problem. So.
In New York now, since the whole, I guess whenever Palestine, whatever, Hamas flew in on gliders and sandals and attacked the rave, you now see in New York people with like bumper stickers supporting Palestine and stuff. That is something that I never seen before in New York. And I think a lot of it has to do with more or less our open immigration policy, where you're now importing problems from that region to your neighborhood. So there were like all these bring them home. There was a lot of kind of like signs up on lamps, on light posts and such, where this person's missing, that person's missing, so on and so forth. And you saw so many people just tearing them down and just getting into arguments in the streets of New York City. And 20 years ago, like during like 9/11 or whatever, 25 years ago now, you would never ever see that. It would be everyone would be supporting Israel because they're a first world country in a basket case region.
I will say this actually. So, what I understand is the policy of Mossad or the state of Israel in general was to fund the more essentially the rural religious types in Palestine on the Muslim side. And they tried to do that to the detriment of the secular nationalists that were more educated in the cities, because they basically figured if you focus on the fundamentalists, they're going to be less likely to agitate for a unified state. And so it's sort of a divide and conquer tactic. So I do understand that criticism of Israel where they say like Israel created Hamas. I think that's a little bit of a stretch, but there is some basis for it. Now, I wanted to ask you, given that you are in New York City, did you learn anything more interesting about the whole tunnel story, or did that just kind
No,
of...
I think most people chalk it up to just Hebes being Hebes, like just
Right.
being just up to something that we're probably never going to be privy to.
Yeah. Well, and it's so frustrating in a sense because my current book project is all about basically how the tribe cultivated their reputation throughout history, but doing it not in the normie, you shouldn't even say normie, but like the kind of counter-Semitic fashion where it's just some image and it's all spooky looking and people assume whatever they see there is correct. I found a lot of errors, like that documentary Europa: The Last Battle they all promote. It's interesting, but there's so many lies by omission and just distortion of historical elements where I wanted to do something different. I want to provide something that is accessible, but also tries to be factual. And you do find in some cases, like looking at blood ritual accusations, some of them are true, some of them are inflated. But it's interesting because they talk about how the tribe, they would be kidnapping children to these rituals. There's another aspect that you definitely don't hear from these folks who are critical, and that is that the Catholic Church had a fairly long-running approach where they would kidnap Jewish children for forced conversions. And when it came to the Iberian Peninsula and the Inquisition got going, a lot of the Jews were trying to get into Portugal. Well, the king, he said, yeah, the adults can come, but if they're not wealthy, they can only stay here for about 8 months, then they're going to be expelled. And your children will be taken and transferred to Sao Tome, where they're going to be raised as Christians. So there's more intricacies to history. If you look at Edward Longshanks and the usurers in the UK, there's reasons why they were in that role. It's not to take any responsibility away from them, but you had these nobles that had their projects, their campaigns, their financial speculation, and they were basically using the tribe as a shield against public dissent while they were profiting off of it. And that's what I'm trying to present, because I think the best way that you can fight the influence of some of these negative entities like APAC, you have to have conversations, but you have to avoid falling into that rut where I just believe reflexively anything because it fits my confirmation bias. And that's the big issue with the right wing in general. That's why I think they're less effective.
There's a, there's a lot of disharmony amongst them in New York City. Like, certain groups don't talk to other groups. I noticed now more than ever the difference between Jews from like German, like the Bergs, the Blooms, the Steins don't necessarily get along with the Skis at all, and there's a clear demarcation between the two. You also have something that I like to call fake Jews. So
Hmm.
fake Jews are ones that come from like Kakistan, Uzbekistan. They're generally Bukharian Jews. I don't know if you know what that type of group is, but
Yes.
they're a whole different ethnic group that don't necessarily get along with the ones that you're discussing with the tunnels and such. And
Hmm.
the one what's interesting about the ones with the tunnels, that's the Chabad. A lot of them don't speak English, which is kind of weird about them.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my god, that means you haven't left this 2 block radius in your entire life if you can't speak a word of English. And that was kind of alarming to me, that you literally live your community is I can walk in about 10 minutes on a Sunday afternoon, and none of you can speak a word of English.
Yeah.
So,
They
and
have
that's the
their own
one.
police.
Well, that's they call it the Messiah's coming or whatever, and that's the same tomb that Trump kind of like put a yarmulke on or some shit, or burnt some type of Bible scripture at his grave, and Ben Shapiro's there with him, and a lot of like regular Jews don't like that group of Jews. So it's confusing. I know a little bit about it just conversing with them and getting to know them and such. But for the most part, they're really not doing anything like, I don't see anything really subversive or what a lot of people talk about on the internet.
Well, in response to Green Frog Good, they are not the only ones that did it. The Italians did it. The Armenians did it. There have been other ethnic groups that have engaged in it. There's going to be varied context to things. It doesn't take away from their influence. If you look at the Rothschilds, if you look at one I just came across was Samuel Demure in Honduras, and was it Grenada? I believe it was Grenada, or Guatemala. I believe Guatemala. Arbenz, his involvement in that, along with Bernays. So, but the point is that history is a little bit more complicated,
Yeah.
and at least my objective is I don't want to give people wrong info that potentially distorts their view further, because we have enough of that. I mean, look at these politicians. They just lie, and people say, well, if you disagree, you have Trump derangement syndrome, or you're just like, you're a MAGA hater, whatever you want to call it. Um, so yeah.
No, so digressing off of that, and we'll wrap it up here. The economy, dude. So since the last time I had a conversation with you, man, my expenses have exploded. Um, and I've been trying to shop for a car. The interest rates are ridiculous. You don't necessarily know if you're being, fleeced. You don't necessarily. There's no price discovery on a lot of things. There's a lot of just general price gouging with certain commodities. Um, What are your? Do you think the money printer is going to continue to go burr? You see what's going on with Bitcoin. You saw even what was it yesterday, where Melania released her own crypto coin. This
Yeah.
apparently now they're saying that the Trump is going to be he's going to be the crypto president. I'll leave the door open to you to start that convo going.
Yeah, I don't think the economy is maybe as bad as some people present it in terms of, if you're a regular guy, it's not good. But there is going to be that aspect which was coming up recently with H-1B debate. Like, are you willing to do certain jobs? And I'm not super sympathetic based on my background. I did work some very unpleasant jobs before I got to where I'm at. So I don't like that attitude of I could do it, but I won't. At the same time, the cost of living is insane. I don't know how, if you're making 40 or 50K, unless you have like a 5 minute commute, how you're surviving, maybe with roommates or something like that. I found stuff such as, and even going to a discount grocer, like cheese used to be 99 cents a block. Now it's $3. Eggs, I was there today. They're almost $8 for a dozen. And this is all in the context of stuff like if you have to get, I have a commute, if I have to get a car fixed, I mean, even putting two tires on, you're
Right.
talking about probably $400. So I sometimes get on people, well, why do you work this? You don't need to. Like, yeah, I'd be okay on my base, but if you're really trying to get ahead, it's hard to do it on 40 hours unless you're like some, I don't know, 500,000 a year earner. And I have a house and I've got, sometimes repairs to do with that. So yeah, it is definitely, it has transformed. I don't know if Trump is going to really be able to ameliorate it, because let's assume he does mass deportations, whether we like it or not. Some of those people are working in the fields and they are working in construction and whatnot. So are the Americans all going to rush to do those manual labor jobs because the wages might be higher, or are they going to be like, hell no, like they might say to some of these other positions? And I'm not, by the way, I don't want to suggest that like they do the jobs Americans refuse to do, because when I was up in, well, when I've been in West Virginia, if I was up in New England last year, most of the road crews, most of the tradesmen, they're all like white dudes. But what I'm saying is, on a large enough scale, is it going to affect prices if they can't rapidly transition to robots? And if you do that and you apply tariffs as well, is the cost of living going to get better for people? That's something that I'm not confident of. Hopefully it will.
I don't. I think the automation thing is blown way out of proportion. That along with the AI, or your AI
Yeah.
is going to take our jobs and stuff. You still need someone to fix the robots. I was like, what is it? Automating a McDonald's. Like, okay, if you automate a McDonald's and that McDonald's breaks, or there's some type of malfunction in the software, that McDonald's can be out of service for quite some time. Like, so, like, I just don't necessarily see how this pivot towards AI is necessarily going to work when we're in fact getting dumber by the moment.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out all these people you've seen on TikTok, and now it's TikTok's back, right?
Yeah.
Going, oh, I got my degree in software engineering, I can't get a job, and prior to that is probably H-1Bs. At the same time, I guess with the automation, the question is, we say there's going to be technicians to fix the machines. The question becomes, and this is what was, I think, our distinguished liberal contrarian intellectual Richard Spencer was talking about, that you have hierarchies in society. And maybe part of the problem is that too many people think they should get a particular job or career that they may not be capable of doing. If you've ever met, especially with the type of immigration we're getting, like some of these people, I work with some people that I would peg them at maybe 85 IQ, and they've gotten a job probably because of DEI. And you have to watch over them, because like
Yeah.
they'll get you in trouble because they're so, scatterbrained about basic things. And so I go, maybe that's part of the issue right there, that we have too many people that are not capable of doing certain jobs inherently, and yet they expect to have they've been sold an American dream of one variety or the other.
Well, most of the ones that are the more like immigrants that have arrived the past, post COVID, they were all working like Uber Eats and they're working at Amazon. I'm friends with one chick from Venezuela. Her English, broken English, but she's like working like 60 hours, for Amazon, non-union. The,
Mhm.
the new thing now is once they started deunionizing those, like those type of jobs maybe like 20 years ago. FedEx is non-union, UPS is union, but they're constantly at war and trying to de-unionize them or just lower their wages one way or another. That these new immigrants are just like just trying to make headwinds one way or another. I got like near my office. There's these guys from Africa just standing around, just like trying to sell Nike knockoffs, and they just stand there with like a towel on the floor, and they are harmless, and they can't speak English, but they're just trying to sell something, just try to get a few dollars, and then like
Yeah.
then they got to go back to their refugee camp or some shit, because most of them, in the way that the bureaucracy and the government works with these refugees, they're technically not allowed to work, so they're out there trying to like push Nike knockoffs and AirPods, and then the cops come along and tell them, nope, nope, you got to go back to where you're from. Sorry, take your towel, or they'll take all their goods away and tell them to go back to whatever hotel you're staying at.
Yeah, that's another aspect to it where, and I live in it's getting, I say, more of a suburb. It was a rural area, but all the Africans everywhere, and this has got to have been some kind of orchestrated program. I don't know if it was Obama or it continued under Trump, where they've been settling these people in such areas, because the number of folks I've come across, Ghana, Sierra Leone,
They
Malawi,
speak French, for
Zimbabwe.
fuck's sakes, and
Right.
they're in
And
like
I
a
mean,
Hispanic neighborhood. It makes no
yeah,
sense.
they're some of the most, I don't know, something about Francophone African people. They're just, at least the women in particular, are so incredibly rude in my experience. But it's just, this has to be a plan. This has to be something they've been doing deliberately.
Yeah.
Much like you see all the content on the commercials, what they've been pushing. I mean, it's not just happen, or it's not a coincidence, or maybe it is a coincidence, but you know what I mean? Uh, I don't understand the concept. And I guess whether it's malicious or they truly believe their own delusions that you can put any person and you teach them to love the
Magic
Constitution,
dirt.
everything's fine. Yeah.
The magic dirt theory. Do you, since you've studied fascism and socialism, do you find that here in the United States it's more just an economic zone, just driving the price as low as possible as far as labor is concerned?
I think it has been for some time, and people maybe look back with rose-tinted glasses, but you can consider there's a good documentary called Blood on the Mountain about that uprising in West Virginia, which I think
Mm-hmm.
occurred in the 20s. And I mean, you literally had the soldiers unleashed, mowing down striking workers and people. That this is back when America was more based and we had better immigration laws. So, yeah, the elites are going to predominate. The problem is that with a lot of the conservative thinking, they assumed that as long as we give them the right environment, i.e., corporations, they're going to respect us on social issues. And that's just not the case. You see what they did to Pat McCrory. You see what they did to Mike Pence when he was governor of Indiana. They will take what you give them and then they'll lube up and give it to you. So uh, I just. I'm obviously not anti-capitalist, but you have to have a kind of healthy balance, and we've lost that. We lost that really starting in the 70s, but definitely in the Reagan era and going forward.
You see, like modern architecture, even music for that matter, anything is now just very sterile looking. There's no there's a lack of art in general towards anything because of this bean counting portion of our economy, where it's kind of like that movie Moneyball. It's like
Hmm.
we've taken the Moneyball, what we've done with the MLB, and just allow accountants, statisticians to really drive what we're supposed to indulge in, and for the most part, people don't like it. That's why people are just strung out in fentanyl, because there's a lack of beauty around us.
Yeah. Well, and then there too, you have conservatives that will say we need to restore civilization or protect the West, and they'll idea of the West is like Michelangelo or whatnot. It's like, but you're not really what I would say. Your messaging to most people is, oh, don't go to university, don't do arts, it's a waste of time. You need to be in a trade. Be like Mike Rowe says, at least that's how I heard it. And Mike Rowe, who studied what, like performance art, whatever, and it's that whole, how are you going to preserve civilization and culture if you're not in any of these institutions? Up until I think 2000, a majority, or at least 50% of US academics were conservative, the World War II generation. And then with Reagan, it was the whole go to Wall Street, make a bunch of money. You want to be some fuddy-duddy academic. But unfortunately, that messaging isn't the most effective. Like I had a boomer telling me, and this kind of goes to how they tend to see the world. He's like, well, why don't you just become a college professor? And I was like, yeah, it's a nice idea, but at this point, I'd have to go do a PhD and I'd be coming out closer to 40, and I'm going to be competing against people that are like mid to late 20s who have PhDs. Like, how's that going to work? Because your life and your career are somewhat correlated. If you are taking 15 years after graduating high school to get ensconced in a career you're trying to switch mid-life, that changes the calculus on everything. If you want to have a family, if you want to buy a house, all these things. And the boomers will just act like, oh, you just flip a switch and you change. So
It's scary how boomers still aren't grasping the social decline around them.
yeah,
And even with now with Trump, like my dad is like diehard Trump, and I was talking to him at Christmas. I go, you didn't give a flying fuck about politics when you were growing up. Why all of a sudden you like glued to Fox News and like obsessed with Trump? I don't understand it. Like they think that for whatever reason that he is actually I'm shit you not, like they really think that he's going to save this country, and it's a frightening concept. And that circles back to the whole Greenland thing with imperialism. Like, yeah, we're going to take Greenland and you show them
yeah.
who's boss. Like, dude, have you not paid attention what's gone on the past 15 years? Like, that's new. Like, I'm not for any of this.
Well, the funny one was back when his first term, supposedly he said in a cabinet meeting, he was like, well, why can't Medicare just cover everyone? And I was going, I guarantee you, if he had come out and said, we're going to make it Americare or Patriot Care and it's for everyone, then all these conservatives are like,
Right.
oh, yeah, Trump's on board with that. Yeah,
Well,
I
that's
can.
that's a lot. I've studied a lot about the Reagan administration, and that's kind of like the whole. Uh, Let me backtrack. So when the boomers hit their 30s, they elected Reagan because I feel as if they realized their own fucked upness during the late 60s and 70s, where it was disco, drinking and driving, cocaine, partying, and then coming of age, you're like, whoa, we got to dial it back and go back to what it was like when we were growing up. And that's where the whole kind of like Reaganomics, like with the American flag and kind of like this neoliberalism wrapped in an American flag that's Star Wars, and we're gonna defeat the Soviets by just bringing the USS New Jersey back into commission and shit like that. And you realize like a lot of the Reagan policies, we're feeling the ramifications of that to this day. I mean, a hedge fund didn't exist until Reagan came into existence. BlackRock was founded in 1987, so on and so forth.
Right. Yeah, and from that, what is the afterbirth, if you will, that they've so adopted these views where if you say, I don't necessarily want all my neighbors to be like in Brampton, Ontario, right? It's basically just a bunch of Khalistanis and various Indians. They're like, well, stop being a victim. Why don't you work harder than them?
Right.
You're not entitled to anything. I'm like, well, yeah, you kind of are. If you've been in the country for so long and your family's contributed taxes, maybe fought in wars, you shouldn't be told, yep, here, fight against the masses of the earth.
Well, how
But
many of them
that's the mentality.
sold the family home to go relocate to, what's that place? The Villages in Florida. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And then you basically go and visit your children and like, oh God, this is where you live. Back in my day, we could have 1,500 square foot condo and work at FedEx and shit. Like you just squandered the family inheritance and the generational wealth so you can live on a golf course in Florida, and that
Well,
that has
Matt,
not stopped at all.
and I think it goes to that whole selling of the idea starting in the 70s. Obviously, Jimmy, RIP, I suppose, he deregulated credit cards because they used to be just for rich people. And that's when you had all this cheap loans available. You didn't have to put as much money down to get a mortgage for a house. You also had the ending of the restrictions on women if they wanted to rent, like they couldn't be single or they couldn't be on birth control. But you keep selling in place of you're going to have a stable life, a pension, and maybe you'll go to the beach once in a while on vacation. They started selling this, you get your 401k and listen to Tony Robbins and you're going to be a millionaire. And everyone's on this trip where they believe they're going to be a millionaire by the time they're 30 or whatnot because they're listening to some person on YouTube. Meanwhile, healthy societies aren't built that way. You're going to have the guys that maybe they're working as a miner and they collect their pension and that's it. But instead we have this, oh yeah, everyone's going to rise to the top. I really believe America works best at this point for upper middle class types,
Yeah.
professionals. But if you're like working class, you really got to pick your battles when it comes to the economy. And it's one reason why I'm not a huge fan of the way Social Security works, because as we're moving into this era where less people seem to be having kids, a lot of folks are just disenfranchised at base. You're like, do I really need to keep paying into the system? At least it should just be a 401k. And even for people that have families, you could inherit it much more easily instead of pay in, get a subpar return, and then who knows if you're really going to get it in the end because it's running out of money.
A lot of people keep telling me to sell my second property, and I have a rate on it that's under 3%, and I'm renting it out. And they're like, "Oh, why don't you sell that, buy a car cash, and move all that money into like a mutual fund or something?" I'm like, "No, I'm not doing
Right.
that. Are you
Yeah.
crazy? I'm not selling a hard asset that's making money for me to throw it into the stock market." And you try explaining that to someone who's older or blue pilled, they think you're nuts.
Yeah. Oh, you just drop everything and do this. Go back to school. Do this. Like go teach English or whatever. Like, "Yeah, I got a mortgage, man." But
Let me ask
no.
you. Let me ask you this: do you think boomers are the first generation that relish in the fact that they're more successful than their children?
Well, I try to be as fair as possible in the sense that there were boomers, if I'm remembering the dates right, that had to go to Vietnam. They couldn't even vote when they were drafted. So I don't like being too all inclusive. And I have met
Right.
some boomers that were legit, like, I remember this older guy, he was talking about he had like maybe $950 a month from Social Security, and he was trying to find a pop-up camper he could just park on someone's property to live in because he had essentially nothing. So I don't like to be too dismissive, but I think what creates the disconnect is that as a boomer, you had more opportunities to screw up, and it wasn't the end. In the sense that a guy I used to work with, his dad was a pot smoking drifter, 19, like no direction. And some dude says that he was hanging out with, "Hey, you want to work for the zoning department?" He's like, "What the hell's zoning?" And 30 years later, he's retiring deputy head of zoning. So top 3 year salary, half of it is pension, subsidized health care. And he had no like college degree or anything like that. Whereas we were told, okay, get a college or get a master's degree, and then you come out and you're in debt and everything's, well, you need to start saving for retirement, but why aren't you having kids? And so it's this sort of, they had it easier comparatively on average. They also had far better demographics if they wanted to find a woman, let's be honest. So yeah, there is an element of that. I don't know if they're really deep down inside they're malicious and laughing, but I think it's just that if they didn't know a different life, they assume that you're just not willing to put in the effort like they did.
I do think a good portion of the millennials are. It's kind of black and white. I see men my age. They're in one or two camps. It's either ones they're like in the grind, like trying to get ahead and make the best of what's in front of them, and then you have the other cohort, which would be the black pilling type, where the neats, I call them 13th graders, where they've
Yeah.
completely just checked out of society.
Right.
And the other thing is like, I'm coming full circle with the women aspect of all this, is that I don't think the average white woman, middle class, from the suburbs can date down or make a sacrifice in order to have a child. They want all the luxuries they have as a woman who doesn't have a child and then have a child on top of it. So the kind of like the child is now an appendage, an accessory to her lifestyle because she wants to compete with the woman who has the in-ground swimming pool and a BMW. So for them, it's like if the guy doesn't have a college degree and he's not making six figures, and if he can't support me, therefore he can't have my child, and kind of like truncate that.
And it also goes to, even if you are, let's say you're working a certain field, you're blue collar as an example, and maybe you make six figures, but the likelihood is if you're off at some, you're working on an oil rig or you're working at a construction site, like when I was a tradesman, we were in a kind of an industrial area park, that kind of thing. You're less likely to come across, socially speaking, women that you have any interest in. You're going to have a lot of Big Berthas, a lot of lesbians,
Yep.
and many of the women there, there'll be short supply. They're already going to be taken or they're kind of playing the field. So that's where you have to say as well, the advice, while it might be good economically speaking, is also putting a lot of the native men out of the reach of the women they want to get with. And those women, as you said, are not necessarily going to want them based upon their status. Oh, you work with your hands, that kind of thing. So, and then at the same time, H-1B, so you're bringing in like these foreigners who are going to be in closer proximity to the women.
Hello,
Now,
dear.
I
Hello.
don't believe, I don't believe the whole Western decline stuff that the Indians are taking all the women. In fact, it seemed like he couldn't define what kind of Indians were taking the women. It changed every few seconds with him. Like, was it the rich kids? Was it the oofy doofies? Was it the Chad Preets? With that being
I don't
said,
necessarily see that. It's probably college educated women with a college educated pajit.
right.
That's usually what I've seen, and it's some pajit that works in tech or something like that. It's not the pajit laying bricks in Brooklyn.
Yeah. And I've honestly maybe once or twice in my lifetime even seen that type of coupling. And I'm in an area where there's a lot of them. So unless they're all secretly doing it behind closed doors, I'm not sure I buy it. But the other thing I guess we could talk about, I mean, what do you think of Aaron Clary's argument that they just don't like men? Do you think that there's merit to it, or is
Yes.
it overblown?
So the overriding majority of women today view men as a pest. And for they kind of sample men, they're not serious about anything that's long term with them. They prefer to be independent, and they they they're air quote, I'm quoting a couple different sources here, peace of mind, meaning I don't want to be bothered by this male who uh, who's operating a completely different frequency, and that's something that's totally foreign to them. You see what I'm saying? So if an average guy who didn't get the arm ticket, who voted Trump, who works with his hands, likes doing things with his hands, is more frugal with his money, that is something that she wants away from her. Because that's a radical departure from her not necessarily her upbringing, but what she stands for.
Correct. Yeah.
That's more or less what's happening. It kind of coincides with the behavioral sink, the Calhoun theory, the mice utopia. I don't know if you're all that familiar with it. I have like three or four books on it, because I'm fascinated by urban development and demographics, how that kind of plays in with one another. And
Yeah.
he in the study he made a point that the female mice and the Norwegian rat would procreate with the most dominant male. The dominant male would protect her like her little area, her space, and all these betas, these incels, would try to go in and, hey, what's going on? Like, let me get a fuck in, right? And the
Mm.
dominant male would just come along and kind of just knock them out of the zone, out of this area. And I think that's what you're more or less seeing. And then there was another cohort of female rats who went WGTOW, who just wanted nothing to do with procreating, wanted nothing to do with raising their baby rats. I truly believe that's more or less what you're seeing, especially in urban environments.
And you're seeing also because at one point with the manosphere it was more of like they would say something and it's kind of like, oh, modern women are terrible and this, that, the other. And now you've seen a sort of unabashed response from women in the form of stuff. I'm sure you've seen Radfem Hitler at some point.
Mm-hmm.
I know she kind of went and ducked to cover because of that, supposedly that Spurgy girl who was tied to her. But even outside of that, Manifestel, I think she's still on YouTube, and she's one of those always telling them it's a waste of time being in relationships. Like most men are crap. So You have to think that if not as many millennials, certainly Zoomer women are growing up and they're hearing this stuff and they have less reason to be like, oh, I gotta conform to some extent to the last vestiges of a prior era as far as female behavior goes. They're like, well, screw it. You don't have to if you don't want to. So I think that's also going to be interesting because outside of the more radical feminists, that was I remember that being a little bit less prominent, but now it's like you almost have a female version of the manosphere that's pushing back and saying, you guys aren't even worth it. And we're lucky to not have to be kind of almost culturally obligated to stay with you as in the past.
Well, a lot of it's red herring. So I did a chat with. Do you know who Donald Jeffries is by any chance?
I've heard the name.
So he's an author, and I go on his show once in a blue moon. And it was the first time me doing these live streams. I chatted with a woman, and she basically was, I could just phone it in, just completing her sentences. Yes, you want your piece, and she would cite, well, all men this, and this is all men want. I go, what men are you talking about? It's the men that you're chasing, right?
Yep.
Because I could name like at least a dozen dudes who are down to earth, who have good jobs, who want a serious relationship and marriage, yet they certainly can't find a decent woman to date. So women tend to have really bad experiences with who they perceive as, I guess, air quote, alpha. They get pumped and dumped, and then they hold these I guess these long term grudges that and paint a broad brush that all men are X, Y, and Z. Or
Yeah.
they screw an athlete or a jock or a hedge fund bro or something like that, and because they screwed that guy, they think they're entitled to that. Well, I slept with this guy, therefore I can achieve hitting this strata, but they wind up just keep getting pumped and dumped by again these type of men that they perceive as alpha, when more or less there's plenty of men out there that are financially stable, don't do drugs, so on and so forth, and they just push the side.
Yeah, and it kind of goes to that thing where should the average person have all this information? Should the average guy or woman be seeing these podcast clips due to the virtue of the internet or TikTok? So just like everyone being rich, or that's the goal, everyone like, oh, I'm not going to settle for this. It's one theory I have that in part, I think it's a small percentage, but part of it is I do believe if you look at some of these women out and about, even going past BMI, right, which is a big problem,
Yeah.
but just look at the facial structure of some of these chicks. I'm sorry, a lot of them are unattractive, like the massive forehead, round face, that kind of thing, got kind of like a muscular build, almost like a dude. That's what a lot of these women you'll see on the apps and even out in person. So there could be an element where if you are consuming a lot of this manosphere content, you're like, well, I'm alpha and I expect this type of woman. Well, there's not that many of those. And especially when you start going down to, well, I don't want tattoos. I don't want piercings. I want her to be religious. I want her to have only, max of 5 body count. Well, that's a very small percentage that everyone's competing for.
Well, it's a downward pressure. So because the collapse of monogamy, and the ease of no fault divorce, guys can spit out 1 or 2 kids with one woman, jump back into the dating scene, and go after young women, and then that pushes the young guys out of action because now he's competing with a guy who's already procreated, already has a few notches under his belt, marriages or second marriages. So yeah, and what tends to happen with those women, those are the women that completely shut out and be like, I can't be bothered by 20 matches on Bumble. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and there too, the way that the apps work is that if she's popular, she may not even see a message she receives.
Right.
So that's why they're trying to say, oh, you have to buy like the Hinge X, and then you'll be the first one on the leaderboard or whatnot. But just quickly, I was going to respond to a couple of things here. Yes, 75% of women under 25, 28 are bi. Yeah, in fact, even if you filter based upon, let's say, being Christian or Catholic and wanting a serious relationship, a lot of those women are bisexual. So you wonder, like, are they just doing it because it's in vogue, or have they actually partaken in that? And the other thing with work, it's not just in like you're going to date your coworker. It's you have a certain schedule and you're in proximity to women that you would be more inclined to date. Like I said, if you're in an isolated environment doing construction, or you're always on the road, you're a trucker, you're a maintenance guy going about, you might find some lonely housewife, but the likelihood is you're not going to come across those types of women outside of living in a college town or a very big city where there are colleges. So
Well,
that's another factor.
well, building upon what you just stated, men now all work specific jobs where they don't necessarily meet women. Like men,
Yes.
like women are in marketing. They work for some publicly traded company. They're in medical billing, nurses and stuff. You're not going to meet guys in those type of jobs. About 20 years ago. Is it 20 years ago? Oh my God, it is 20 years ago. It was like Hurricane Katrina time. I used to work on a fishing party boat, fishing charter
Mhm.
boat, and it was about a 120-foot vessel. It fit, about between 50 to 80 people at a given time. And I used to work the night shift on this party boat. We go out from like 7 p.m. to like 1 p.m. And I would work the Friday and Saturday nights because that's where you make your most money. And women would, well, like a bridal shower, a bridal party, or whatever. They would go on these boats, bringing like coolers of beers and stuff. It'd be like probably like a half a dozen 20-something-year-old women. They bring a shit ton of beers, and they would just hang out, and they would converse with all these guys just looking to fish, right? And they would give them beers, like, hey, come talk with us, come hang out. And they wind up exchanging numbers, or going home with one another. You don't see that anymore. Women don't actually go out of their way to try to find a guy. It's expected of men to do all the kind of doing most of the groundwork. So it's mostly the song and dance, and this whole courting process is completely lopsided unless you're, again, a hedge fund bro, where you don't necessarily have to do any of the work. The women just come to you. You go to like a specific lounge in Manhattan where the men with a lot of money tend to go to, and then you get all these women go there to try to shack up with someone who has a significant war chest of money.
And the logistics play a role as well. So depending on where you're living, so the big push in the manosphere was, I mean, who's saying this specifically? But I remember hearing a lot of voices saying, you should go live in the country. Don't be in the city. And
Oh God.
yeah, I get it, but you're also increasing the likelihood that all your options are going to be on dating apps. So if you're not above average, it's already you're at a disadvantage. I mean, I last week off Hinge, I drove, it was like an hour and 15 minutes in a very congested area. Met this chick, had a good time, smashed. But I'm like, do I want to do that on the regular? Like, do I want to be driving out here? Because
Are you worth it?
yeah, and that's the thing. Cute girl, nice personality, but very needy. And that's the thing too. Like you're almost better off in a city because you go for the coffee break if you're working a regular shift, and there's going to be people in a line at Starbucks. You're going to have maybe socials at work. So those are going to provide more opportunities. It's great to be a tradesman, or maybe you're a geological engineer, but you're going to be probably more isolated from the women you want to date, especially in your 20s. So that's going to be a hurdle of sorts.
I was in
And
where was I? I was near Chelsea District, and I never ventured to this part of Manhattan. And I had to go pick up a piece of furniture. I could not believe the amount of gorgeous women walking around. Now, keep in mind, and this is for all my listeners out there, no homeless, no immigrants. There's
mhm.
no Iqbal trying to sell halal meat. Nothing of the sort. A safe kind of utopian uh, section of Manhattan where there's no crime, there's no litter, there's none of that, and all these beautiful women gravitate to this one location, which I find interesting. Like, did the NYPD direct resources and funds to just this region of Manhattan? I tend to think so, because the last thing they want is a dead white girl, right? Because that would
Oh yeah.
scare away a lot of tourists, and probably hurt real estate values to some extent. But point being is that area in particular, you're not going to find a tradesman. You're not going to find a guy who makes regular money. He's not going to go have brunch on a Sunday in this region, and it's all women. There are no men. The occasional homosexual on a bike, yes, but point being is that guys aren't necessarily going to these locations to drop $100 to $200 on a shitty meal. But
Yeah, I
women
mean, I
tend to
would.
do that. And then the question is, how do they get the money? Well, I tend to believe that a lot of corporations are subsidizing fertile women from not procreating. I know that's a little bit more of a tinfoil hat, but I've talked about it quite a bit, that a lot of corporations now that are, what is it? Their PE ratios are like off the charts, where they're insolvent, yet they still keep grinding along, and these women have these just make believe positions, like making 150, $200,000, but they're not actually contributing to society in any meaningful way other than just spend, spend, spend.
Well, part of it too is that the growth of the state. A lot of these companies are being propped up by the government
Right.
in one form or the X. I don't know if you've ever read that book by Edward Griffin, The Creature from Jekyll Island, and he details all the throughout history, like the number of bailouts the government has done. And some of these I'd absolutely never heard of. And when you consider government contracting and then businesses that are directly or indirectly dependent, like they provide food services to people that work those jobs. Yeah, it's much larger than that. So it's easier for women to get hired, period. I was talking at my side gig with this dude, and he's kept trying to get on with an IT job, and he said, like, that company literally, you can be a guy, send a resume, they're going to hire the woman.
Right.
That's just how they operate.
You ever see these like TikTok shorts or YouTube shorts of like these like hot 25-year-old? This is my job. Here's my day at Google. I'm gonna get myself something to drink. Only
Yeah.
organic water. Like, and have you ever seen any of those type of videos?
Oh yeah, the Twitter life, all that kind of
Yeah,
crap. Yeah.
right. And you see where they work, and it's almost, if not an extension of college. Like, it's like now it's like a dormitory. You see like the Google cafeteria. You see, like any of these tech companies that have uh, uh, office space in Hudson Yards. Like, this is not reality. And again, like I truly don't believe they're actually working. Yet at the same time, you see they're in like these safe spaces where everything is kind of like prepackaged and given to them to, I don't know, for an Instagram feed or whatever. And that's for real. Like, I'm no joke. Like, that's a real thing in Manhattan.
Well, to respond to recreational schizo, I think it's name. Yeah, interestingly enough, there was a claim that I think it was Eric Schmidt, the senator from Missouri, was a pay pig for some chick. Like he was just taking her out to stuff her face with food and just giving her money. And she was claiming that, I mean, she didn't say his name, but it was strongly implied that he said, all these people who elected me are morons. I don't care about conservatism or anything. It's just like a career. And I'm like, yeah, wow, this is what the elite's doing. That's kind of embarrassing. But
Well, listen. Anyway, we're coming up on 2 hours. I'm not gonna. I could keep going and going, but why don't we shelve this? We could do something a little bit more concrete if you're interested. Maybe do a book review or something like that, because that's something I would love to do, and I know you love to read. I
yeah.
really appreciate you coming on and chatting with me. I had a lot of
Well,
fun, and last time we chatted, I had a blast. Also, that's why I wanted to reach out to you.
yeah, no, it's a good time. Let me quickly say this. My brother just sent this to me. I don't know if you know who Ruth Ben Ghiat is.
No, no.
Okay, so she's on Twitter. Historian of fascism here. That was a Nazi salute and a very belligerent one. That was Musk waving to the
Yeah.
crowd. I can't even, man. I find it hilarious. And I think part of the problem with the plural left is that they got to this stage of overly trying to demonize things with these terms, and like people just are so desensitized, it doesn't matter
It
anymore.
doesn't. It's like the word racism or Nazi. It doesn't. It has no meaning anymore.
I mean, hell, we had Curtis Yarvin being interviewed by the Times, and the guy's very hostile to democracy, and it's just, yeah, it's crazy times we're living in. It's like the elites have decided we need to be entertained constantly. It's not like back in the day; it seemed like something big happened maybe twice a year. Now it's like every couple of weeks there's a new
But we're
story.
forgetting everything that happened from the day before. Like, what
Yeah,
happened to the New Orleans guy that plowed through everyone on New Year's Eve? That memory hold, memory hold, memory hold. I'm in the middle of reading Incident at Chacalin. Incident Chacalin. It's a Kale Flight 007 from 1983.
yeah.
When the Soviets shot down a 740s Korean Air Flight 747. It was a They blasted it out of the sky. And this is like a rabbit hole of information on what happened that day when this airliner got blown out of the sky. And I'm reading this book and I'm thinking like, oh man, what happened to the two Malaysian flights? Like no follow up. Has anyone written any a Substack article on it? And it just you miss too much if you stop to think about what you're inspired and you're on to the next thing. And I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
it's really I think it's damaging to our psychology as a nation, if not globally, where we don't actually process uh, the full aspect of what we were just digesting. We just get snippets and little factoids, and then randos on YouTube do a 20-minute short or 20-minute video on the current event. I just like I tried to stop and read and try to digest and get all the facts, and the overwhelming majority of people don't do that anymore.
No, you just need to listen to Adam Ruins Everything. You know, that's all you need. They're young Turks, but yeah, East Palestine derailment. Obviously, the Las Vegas shooting that just kind of disappeared. Like, really?
Did
How'd
you
you
see
pull
the
that
Google
off?
map of that? Someone made a whole Google map where you can click and interact with the map on all the 911 calls, all the shootings and first responders 911 calls and stuff. Have you seen that?
Oh yeah.
Oh, cool. All right. I didn't think many people saw that.
So this is where it gets a little bit, we can do the tinfoil hat, but you remember the Joker guy back, it was at 2012 in Colorado, shot up the theater.
Yep, of course.
So at a certain department store, I won't say which, they had a display for TomTom GPSs. And it literally said, because they'd have like, the cardboard would depict places you could go. And this was a week or so before that thing happened. It said Aurora, Colorado. That was the destination. And then, of course, once this happened, they were covering it up and whatnot. You're like, you sometimes, just like The Simpsons or Michael Jackson, his CD covers, like, are they trying to tell you something about what's going to occur? And or what has happened. Like I mentioned earlier with Trump talking about Pennsylvania and the voting machines and Musk, and you're like,
The Trump shooting is another one. Yeah, gone.
yeah.
Just gone.
And then like two more, and yeah, okay, whatever.
Well, listen, I'll end it there. I'll talk to you for a few minutes after when we end this. All right.
Okay,
All
cool.
right. Thanks, everybody. We'll stay tuned.
Take care.
I'll be doing a show with Myth coming up in the next couple of weeks. And listen, Mr. Goldberg, a pleasure. Let's definitely do this again sometime soon.
Yeah, likewise, and much